Hello, it's Emma from Nurse Fern, and today we are doing a nurse interview with an amazing nurse from Carta Healthcare. Jessica, can you tell us what you do at Carta Healthcare?
Yeah, of course. So my title is Senior Abstraction Manager, which means I meet with teams at the hospitals that we contract with, and we assess their specific needs and coordinate the abstraction team and caseload to make sure all the work gets done on time and accurately. We do this with a lot of different hospitals, and we support them by managing their clinical registry programs.
So now I gotta back up for a quick second because I know a lot of people in our community haven't heard of Carta before. Can you give a quick rundown on what the company is?
Yes, definitely. So Carta Healthcare was developed to help these hospitals sort of manage what their different registries are, how they abstract the data for them, and how they use that data to then help push their metrics further in the hospital. So in order to kind of explain that, I sort of have to go into a little bit about what registries are. As a floor nurse, this is something I had never heard of, never knew existed, but registries are data collection hubs, so to speak. So the work that abstractors do feeds the national guidelines for things like door-to-balloon times, different stroke measures and sepsis measures, and how they help create the guidelines for patient care. So the registries collect the data that support clinical change and provide the different volumes and quality outcomes that the hospitals create. So there's different kinds of registries. Some are based on conditions like sepsis, chest pain, heart failure. In those cases, we take that data for patients who have had those diagnoses and we look to see what sort of treatments they received, how timely their care was, things like that. And then there are also registries that are tied to specific surgeries and procedures, like open heart procedures, pacemaker procedures, different cath lab procedures. And in those cases, we're taking the data in the chart to help support why the patient needed that procedure done, what the procedure went like as they were going through it, and what their outcomes looked like when it was all said and done. And the reason we collect all of that is to go into a national database where the different entities like American Heart Association, different things like that can then use that data to help support their guideline therapies. And in addition to that, hospitals can then say, they use their own personal data to say, look, we've done a really good job meeting all these measures, and now we can use this for accreditation or for certain reimbursement programs to get reimbursed by CMS or other insurance companies for the types of procedures that they do.
Super good rundown. I really appreciate that you went into that because now I'm going to ask, because like you brought up before, a lot of nurses aren't especially aware that this is happening. They may have been asked to look for things on their unit and charting, which is a little bit of auditing and abstracting. But how did you get into it?
I'm so glad you asked that because we have sort of a joke within our little abstraction community that most of us were voluntold into this position. Like I said, most of us don't know that this even exists, or that when you're working in the hospital, there's a whole thing going on in the background of other people who are doing all the supportive work that you're unaware of, which is fine and how it should be. You should be devoting your time to patient care. But for me, I was sort of overworking night shift. I had done it for a few years. I was starting to get a little exhausted and was looking for something to move into day shift, and my manager on the unit actually asked if I would be interested in doing quality work, and I didn't really know what that meant, but it was day shift, so I went with it. And that's where I started learning more about the day-to-day stuff that goes on in the hospital. So this is where I started meeting the other abstractors at our hospital who do this work, the people who help set up guidelines with infection prevention and accreditation. That sort of all falls in that quality realm. So I did have some experience during that time doing abstraction. And then eventually I stopped doing that and moved into other roles. And then, of course, we all know COVID created sort of an unexpected pause in our lives. And so during that time, I was at home and I was no longer in the hospital. I found myself sort of kind of looking for something else to do. I knew I didn't really want to go back into the hospital setting, but I really wasn't sure what was out there that I could do remotely. And that's when I remembered how much I did like abstraction when I had done it. So just simply looking online, I found a couple different companies. I was really interested in Carta Healthcare because I know I was reading that they're really interested in AI and using that to help improve abstraction efforts. And so I've been here for 4 years and thriving. I'm loving it. It's the flexibility I was hoping for without having to go back into the hospital during COVID. It just worked out really well, and I'm still happy doing it.
Yeah, I fear at work I sat a little too still one day and I got handed papers and told to look up different charts and look for information, which
Right.
is how I started to find out about these other roles. And if you don't know to ask your leads or your managers that this even exists and they're doing it, you often don't find out unless you're the first person they see and they need a task done and you
Yeah,
look like
I
you have
think
time.
that's the biggest thing is most people don't know to ask. They don't even know these things exist until all of a sudden you're in them. And then it's like a whole different door opened up. Now you have all these other opportunities that you never knew about.
On a personal level, I'm curious, what was the reception from your fellow coworkers like when you told them you were leaving your clinical role to do this?
It was actually really positive. A lot of people were kind of in the same boat. You know, my work friends were similar to me. They didn't know that these things existed. As I got to learn more and more and tell them about what I was doing, they really became more interested in, all right, well, how do I do that? How do I move into something like that? And there's sort of this idea that if you stop working at the bedside, you're going to lose all of your clinical knowledge and skills. And I think that a lot of people are hesitant to move into remote roles because of that, sort of this use it or lose it idea. And to be fair, I was one of them, and I very much was worried about that at the time. What I have learned, though, and what was more of the surprise for me, was that I didn't expect how much I'd grow as a critical thinker. I think I actually became a better nurse by stepping away from the bedside in the sense that I really have a better opportunity now to understand some of these concepts, some of these disease processes, and really understand the care that I was providing at the bedside without the physical strain of always being at the bedside. So I feel like I'm flexing that clinical knowledge more than I thought I would, which has been probably the biggest surprise for me. And essentially helping out my colleagues when you think about it in the sense that now I know what needs to be done, and instead of just coming down from some administrator when now you're being told we're doing it this way with no real explanation as to why, now I understand the why. And so I feel like I can sort of help my own colleagues and my own friends who are still working at the bedside by saying, I bet that's frustrating to have to do this new process without knowing why. I've had the opportunity to now learn exactly why we're doing it that way. Let me help you. And so it's just this, it's still difficult work, but difficult in a way that I found more challenging mentally than physically, which is what I was starting to get worn down from in the hospital, I think.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I feel that way. And almost every single nurse that I speak with brings that up, that stepping outside of the bubble the specialty bubble that they were in and doing something a little bit different helped expand their worldview of the healthcare system. And we all believe that it only benefits patients when nurses learn more about how the system actually works.
It's just once you know that those opportunities are there, it's easier to see that. But before you know that, it's really, you don't even, I guess you don't really realize that as a bedside nurse, you think that's sort of the end, right? That you've worked all this time to have that be your career forever. And it very well can be. And most people who do that are wonderful and should be in those types of positions forever. And some people are not made for that. And so it's really nice to know that there are other options that can help when you are starting to feel a little burned out or something, or you need a little change or a new challenge.
Okay, on a silly note, do your neighbors and family, do they understand what you do now, or do they think you've left nursing?
Oh, they have no idea. There are days where
Yeah.
they do know I'm a nurse, which is nice because then they still come to me with all of their rashes and questions about how this or that should be done. But it's been a little more difficult to explain what I do on my day to day. But when I get really into it, my friends know, they have a better of what I do and the knowledge that I get to use. And they kind of understand that I'm not so much seeing patients anymore. Doesn't mean they're going to stop asking me questions about what's going on with them and their relatives, but I have a better understanding now that I can help them with that from a knowledge standpoint.
I want to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of your role Can you walk me through like what you do from log in to log out?
The nice thing about this type of role is that it's very structured. And I think that for me, I really need that structure, but I also like being able to play within the lines of that. So it's not so structured that I have to do A, then B, then C, then D. It's more like, here's an outline of what your day is going to look like. Have at it. So within Carta Healthcare, we contract with different hospitals, and the way that works is once a month usually they give us a case list. They say, here's all the patients that received these procedures last month, and then we give them out to our abstractors as assignments. So here's your weekly assignment, this many cases, they're due by this date, and you're an adult, we trust you to get the work done. You have until this deadline to get these cases complete. If you can't, we reach out and we work with people all the time because life happens and we want to make sure the work gets done, but want to support you as well. And then you just start on your cases. So on a normal day, I would log in, start my time clock, open up my first case, and then get an idea of what I'm looking at. For me personally, I abstract for cath lab procedure cases. So anytime a patient is getting a stent put in their heart or they're having an angioplasty or a balloon being inflated in there somewhere, what I'm doing then is going through and reading that patient's chart and pulling out the details that need to be reported. So for example, was this patient a smoker? Did they have a history of heart attacks? Is this somebody who has high cholesterol? And we're putting together all those puzzle pieces almost. And then I'm going through and reviewing the procedure itself. That's sort of the next step is, okay, did we do the procedure? How did the patient handle the procedure? How much radiation did we use while the patient was going through the procedure? And then at the end, you're doing the last bit where you're saying, okay, the procedure went well, or there were these complications. What does that look like? Is this patient going back home, or are they going somewhere else now? Do they need rehab? Things like that. And you're kind of just providing the big picture to this data registry. So each case generally takes about an hour, hour and a half, depending on the complexity of it. You finish your case and you move on to the next. It can sound a little tedious, I think, to somebody who hasn't been in the charts and doing it this way, but it's really more detective work, like puzzle solving, which is kind of what made me so curious about it in the first place. Most things are pretty straightforward, but then when you start doing this often enough, you learn some of the rules. So for example, when a patient has a stent placed, they are supposed to be discharged on aspirin following that procedure because to help with blood thinning and stuff like that. But there are times when they won't be. And so the registry asks those questions. Well, were they discharged on this aspirin? And if not, why not? And so that's when you get to play this little detective role where you're digging through the chart and trying to find, was this addressed? What was the reasoning? And a lot of times what I found is that these hospitals and these physicians are doing the right thing for their patient. They just don't always know how to document them in a way to get credit for the good work they're doing. So one of my most gratifying, I guess, pieces of this job is being able to do that, being able to tell them now, we meet with this site and say, hey, you guys are doing a great job at making sure the patient's discharged on aspirin. This guy wasn't, but I can see kind of what you were thinking here, but it needs to be really clearly documented so that you can get credit for the work you are doing. So it's things like that where I'm every day looking in the cases and getting in the weeds, but then also understanding the big picture and being able to have those conversations with the client on how we can help improve their practices going forward. And then on top of all of that, I'm at home. And so I can kind of weave in my work-life blend there. So I can do 2 cases, take a break, go to a spring concert that was scheduled in the afternoon on a Wednesday for some reason, and then come back and work a little more. And I can kind of alter my day around my needs, which isn't always kids. It can be appointments, anything that some days it's just going for a walk. Scheduling, it's a nice day out. I want to give myself a 30-minute break to go for a walk around the neighborhood, come back, and then feel refreshed and get back to work. So that's more of like what every day kind of looks like.
For nurses that aren't involved in lead activities and meeting with hospitals on site and whatnot, how many cases a day are they typically expected to do? And if that's not really a clear question because there's a million registries, like, I'll just let you take the question.
All right. The nice thing about Carta Healthcare, and at least I can't speak for every company, but I know that our processes really allow for flexibility. That's our biggest key, is offering flexibility is going to make you happier and make you want to continue to do the work. We don't have any sort of requirement for minimum number of cases, maximum number of cases. It's really up to your schedule and what you're able to do for us. You know, a lot of people do this job as part-time, either as an adjunct to a current position they already have, or we have probably about, I'd say 20 to 30% of our abstractors are retirees who have done this kind of work in the past, and now they're really just looking for something to keep them busy on the days when, you know, being retired can get a little boring. They want a little bit of that mental challenge back, which is great. And so it can be up to maybe, I would say 5 or 6 cases in a day would maybe put you to like a full-time day. That would probably take you about 8 hours when you're looking at breaks and stuff like that. But you also can do 2 cases in a day, you know, just depending on what you're able to offer. And so we do have a lot of communication with our team ahead of time to say, okay, how many hours are you looking for? What best accommodates you? And that's not always written in stone either. So if you can generally do 20 hours of work a week, but now this week is spring break and you'd really like to cut back to spend some time with the kids or the grandkids, that's not a problem. We can adjust just to make sure that you're getting what you need from us so that we can keep getting the best work that you're able to put out.
What would a nurse who struggles in this role look like?
I very rarely see people struggle. I think the work itself is, if you're experienced with it and you know what's coming, you can kind of make your way through it. I will say, I'll kind of flip it, I guess. The people who really thrive at jobs like this, at this type of position, are the people who have that curiosity, I guess, that who have the ability to get into that deep focus, pay attention to details, you know, all the words that we always like to say about, you know, we really want someone to be able to really get in there and look at everything and assess everything. But I think generally the biggest thing is curiosity. If you don't have the curiosity, if you're not interested in what you're doing or why you're doing it, you'll always struggle. And I think that kind of goes across lots of different jobs. But for this in particular, that curiosity about why wouldn't they order aspirin at discharge? Let me go take a look. Like, those are the people who do better in this job because they're pushing, they're taking the extra time to go a little further, a little harder to make sure that this case is being done, you know, perfectly as it can be before moving on to the next one. I think realistically in this role, nurses are kind of already wired for this type of thing. You know, we always do that. We have a tendency to ask why and to get a little deeper into what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so I think that really, you're just kind of applying those instincts differently when you're doing this type of position. And those people really seem to do better. You know, if you're just trying to rush through a case to get it done, you'll get it done, but you're not gonna have that feeling of gratification like you do when you've solved the riddle or completed the puzzle that you were looking at.
Do you have hard days in this job?
Yeah. I think a challenging day actually reminds me of why I do love this work. You just have to kind of step back and see it that way. But really, you know, the hard days are those cases that are really complex, or the difficult charts where maybe the documentation isn't up to the standards you were hoping it would be, or now you're going to have to get creative with how you're doing this and that. And so it's challenging, but it's also sharpening your critical and clinical thinking, you know. It's knowing, sometimes it's having to like Google different things that you may not have thought about since nursing school or that you haven't dealt with since you were on the floor, but it's kind of nice because you're still building it all up. And so it can be challenging in the fact that this case is going to require extra time and attention that I'm going to have to devote to it. But at the same time, it's the challenge is kind of why you did this work in the first place. So even the hard days are still very, I hate the word gratifying because I keep saying it, but they can be. You know, I had a lot of times, I told you I do the cath PCIs. So every patient who has a stent or something put in, those are the procedures that I review. And so for that, when you're looking at a more complex case, that may be somebody who had a stent placed, went back to the unit, developed new chest pain, had to come back, something happened, there was a complication that needs to now be addressed. Those are the kinds of cases that are going to take a little more time. But also, those are the cases where I can see that before I start the case, and I'm like, all right, let's dive in. It's going to be a little bit more challenging, but as long as every single case isn't like that, those are fun. Those are kind of like the one-off exciting. Like, it can be boring if you're doing easy stuff all day long.
I feel the same way about my job. I always end up finding parallels between clinical documentation integrity and like what everybody else does. We're also interconnected.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, we all just want patients to get the best care possible, and we want it charted well.
Right? And you're always rooting for them. I feel like when I'm going through the charts, I'm like, come on, I know you documented that.
Yeah, you just want to find that little piece of information. You're like, please have somebody drop it somewhere for me to be able to pick up. Something interesting that I know Carta Healthcare does really well, and I'd love you to talk about it a little bit more, is the integration of AI in your workflow.
That's probably one of the coolest things that I get to be a part of right now. Because we all know we're in this ever-changing world and AI is becoming bigger and bigger. One of the big things that came out that our founders of our company had realized is how can we use this to help make the job easier for nurses and people who abstract cases. Not in the sense where how do we replace them, which I think is a common misconception. I think a lot of people are under the assumption that AI is going to take our jobs and that AI can do a better job with certain things than the human brain. So one of the big focuses of Carta Healthcare is helping people understand that that is not our intention. We've created a tool that actually acts as more of an assistant, not an autopilot. So what it's doing is it integrates with Epic or Cerner or whatever the EMR system is that we're investigating, and it helps parse out that information that I would be doing manually. So for example, when I have a case where a patient was transferred from another hospital and all of their paperwork is now scanned into the chart, that can take a lot of time, especially if it's someone with a really long past medical history. I could be spending an hour going through all of that paperwork, looking for all the little pieces of information that I need. The benefit of having an AI assistant is that it can parse all of that information immediately, right? Very quickly. And so then what it does is we have it sort of provide that evidence to our abstractors. So instead of saying, oh, the AI found the answer, this is what you need to put, it puts it back in the hands of the abstractor and says, okay, I did all the digging. Here's what I found. What do you think? And so it's a really nice system in that it's very timely. It helps us go through things that would normally take a really long time, almost instantly. And the nice thing about it being AI versus some sort of mapping tool that can just go and pull out specific data elements is that with AI, you can tune it. You can give it the data definitions that we're looking for. So for example, one of the data elements that I collect is in a normal case is did the patient have their ejection fraction taken or looked at in the last 6 months? So the AI can not only pull in all of the echocardiograms and things that it knows I'm going to need to review, but it can also then suggest, hey, you should look at this one because this one was done within 6 months and I know that's what you're looking for is something in this time frame. And then there's other little weird features of the registry that say, okay, well, if they gave you that data as a range, if they said the ejection fraction is 60 to 65%, we want you to enter 60. That's the number we want to see. And so you can put that all into the AI. So then the AI will come back and say, not only do I think this is the echo you should use, I think you should code 60 because in that echo it said 60 to 65 and I know you're looking for 60. So it's trainable in that sense where you can give it what you need it to look for and it can stay within its resources to find that for you. But at the end of the day, it's not answering the questions. It doesn't have that clinical reasoning that we do, right? It can give you what it sees, but it's never going to really understand the reasoning behind why we're pulling certain data elements versus others. So it's a very nice tool that we can use to be more efficient and timely. But as far as taking someone's job, we're a little ways away from that for right now.
So you brought up like training it a bit and working with it to get the information that you need. Is there because that's kind of techy. So is there a tech requirement or something that nurses should be aware of or know that they're able to use different programs and things to thrive in this role?
I would say yes, there's a bit of a learning curve. However, we're very flexible with our abstractors and putting them where they need to be to thrive. So for example, we work with all sorts of different EMRs, right? If you're very unexperienced or inexperienced with a certain EMR and you don't feel comfortable abstracting cases within that EMR, just let me know. I'm happy to move you to another, client that uses one that you're more comfortable with. Or conversely, if it's something you're not experienced with but you really are interested in it, this is a great opportunity to learn how to use it. So we always sort of tailor our training to our abstractor with what their needs are. And we have had people who have never used a certain EMR or who have never used a certain data collection tool and have tried it and then not been interested, realized maybe, you know what, I think I just like doing it the way I've always done it in the past. Not a problem. We have the ability to sort of place you where you're going to feel more comfortable and do better work. I think it's important to do that instead of holding every single person to the exact same level of experience. Some of our abstractors have never even had to use things like AI and have reached a point where they're like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need that, and that's perfectly fine. We have a lot of sites where we don't even use the tool, where we just abstract manually for those sites, and that's a great fit for them, whereas we sometimes have other abstractors who are super interested in the AI aspect and really want to get more deeply involved in that, and we can help guide them that way as well.
I was just going to ask if you have nurses who have never utilized AI before and how it's received.
Yeah, it's very cool, I think, to get to teach people and help sort of change that mindset. I think a lot of people who haven't used AI already have this preconceived idea of what it does and what it doesn't do and all sorts of things like that. But to be able to work with people and show them there's nothing to be afraid of. It's an awesome feature. It's a really good tool. But also, you're not required to use it. If you don't feel comfortable, that's perfectly fine. We can put you with a site where that's not the requirement, where we can do things without it. But I really like that opportunity to show people. So we do use AI with our tool that we've created, our assistive tool, but we also use it in our everyday. We have AI incorporated into the different features that we use. If I'm assigning cases out to my team, I can use AI to help notify them and just helping sort of explain that AI isn't always what you think it is. It can come in a lot of different ways. And I think that helps expand the understanding of it and maybe more of the acknowledgement, like, I do see how this can be beneficial in more than just the ways I've been seeing on TV or in the media.
What do you think the hardest part of this job is that nurses struggle with, or that you're like, the job description did not talk about that?
So for me personally, I thought when I first took this position, it was going to be clock in, do the work, clock out, and I would have no, I don't want to say emotional involvement, but that I would have no investment really. Sort of thought that this would be a position where I just clock in, do the work, clock out, and that it wouldn't be pulling me into those cases, those scenarios, the way that bedside nursing did or other, aspects of working in the hospital. And I think for me, one of the hardest parts that I wasn't anticipating was that investment that I ended up finding. So what you and I were saying earlier about you're rooting for these people. You want these hospitals to do really well. And as you're going through these notes, you're like, I know I can help. Come on, please tell me you documented that one thing you need. And so you do become really invested and you do want to see these hospitals that we're contracted with, I want to see them succeed. And I wasn't expecting that. I really thought I was going to be able to kind of keep that in its own bucket, that wouldn't affect me in that way. But that, I think, has probably been one of the harder things to kind of deal with is I'm doing the work for this site, but I don't have the ability to tell them how to do their jobs. I can only give them data and show them, like, look at what this can do for you if you want to adopt this new process. So that probably is more of a struggle for me, but that also probably speaks to some of my type A tendencies where I kind of want to overmanage. So I don't know if everyone finds that to be the hardest part of the job, but for me, it's that.
That's such a good answer. I really didn't expect you to come out with that. I thought you were gonna be like, oh, that I have to manage my own day. But that's a really good point. I'm always amazed at what people come up with when I ask them these questions, because I'm like, everybody always ends up sounding so much smarter. Something that's been in the back of my head Did you experience, I call it caregiver regret, but just when you left hands-on patient care, did you go through a mourning period or anything like that?
It's really interesting. And I'm glad you asked that because I did. And I thought like that was weird. I think that's something we don't really talk about enough when we're doing this kind of work is, yeah, it was kind of hard. And I think that that's why people are, sometimes I think that's why people are hesitant to take jobs that are so different from what they're used to is they say it's, oh, I don't want to lose my skills. I don't want to do this. But I do think it's more what you're saying. It's more that sadness of like, oh, I was really enjoying this role of being this important person in this person's life and you know helping them get through these times that they're dealing with and just sometimes even being the only person who made them smile today. And there is that like sadness that that's not the case anymore. What I do think though, it didn't last very long. Once I realized that I can still use my knowledge and clinical experience in a different way, I think I felt fulfilled again. It wasn't so much, it was just sort of readjusting my mind frame. You know, it wasn't realizing that I'm not physically helping patients anymore, but now seeing that I'm helping them in a bigger, more global way than I was before. That it's still the same thing, it's just a different aspect of it. It's thinking about it differently. And that really kind of helped me get over that, I think.
I couldn't agree more. And back to our topic, talking about like what nurses might struggle with in these types of positions. That's what I often hear the most is nurses choose to go back to clinical care because they struggle with how are they helping patients still.
Right. And that's the flexibility of nursing too, right? I could go back to the bedside tomorrow if I wanted to. And it's really nice that we have those options.
Okay, now I'm going to hit the fun questions. I promise. No more deep, serious questions. I want to know what your favorite work from home snack is.
Well, I would have to say there's two things. Every single person I work with will tell you that I am rarely in a meeting without a Red Bull in my hand, which is completely, it is my vice. I can't stop myself. I am obsessed. I do make sure I drink sugar-free to try and preserve something in here. But Red Bull is definitely one of my guilty pleasures. I love it. I've never drank coffee, so I have to get my caffeine somewhere. And somewhere down the line, someone gave me a sugar-free Red Bull, and I've never been able to put them down. And then my other snack, I would say I eat an obscene amount of goldfish crackers. I buy them for my kids and then eat them all myself while I'm working all day. I have to buy twice as much because I eat more than I think I bought for them.
I get my steps because I pour little tiny containers of goldfish and eat them one by one like a psycho. And then I have to walk back to the kitchen to refill my tiny little container.
That's so smart. That is like one of the best things about working from home is tricking yourself into moving around and doing stuff like that because otherwise it's so easy to sit there and eat an entire bag. I'm going to do that. I'm going to start making myself go on little trips.
Final question. What is your favorite work from home office item? Like must have piece of equipment or something?
Okay, don't laugh, but one of my coworkers showed me this little gadget that I am obsessed with. It looks like an arch and it's a hand warmer and you put it over your mouse, like over your mouse pad, because I am always cold and it just warms that little area over your fingers when you're playing on your mouse. And it has become my must-have. I cannot work if I don't have my hand warmer. It's so insane, but I have to have it.
I think you just gave the most unique answer. Nobody has ever mentioned a personally arched hand warmer for their mouse before.
It's the best thing, though, that I've ever had, and I recommend it to everybody. I'm not kidding. I send links out all the time. Like, you guys don't know what you're missing.
I don't know if I could ever say that my hand is cold, but now I'm worried if I try this, then I'm going to become dependent on it. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you sharing your insights about your role and talking about Carta Healthcare a little bit.
Thank you. It's been so nice getting to chat with you.